Hello and a very good morning or good afternoon to all of you who are joining this webinar. We're just going to give it a few more seconds as I can see the number of attendees increasing rapidly, but please do use the chat box to say hello, tell us where you're from, tell us which school you're representing, what your role is, what you're expecting to get out of the webinar. I can see some familiar names, so it's great to see lots of people from the education industry joining this for what's going to turn out to be a super interesting session. My name is Charles Wood and I lead the international team at Sentry. And today we're very pleased to bring you this webinar series. And we've been overwhelmed by the response of people attending. We've had nearly 1,000 people register to attend this webinar, so it's proving to be one of our most popular. We've got 44 countries represented on this webinar today, which is remarkable. Countries like Algeria, Zambia, Vietnam, Hong Kong, the UAE, of course. So it's great to see so many different people from different countries and different schools. We also have, I think, half of the GEMS teachers in attendance today, which is brilliant. Welcome to all of you from GEMS. And we're set to have a really brilliant show. But before we get started, just a little bit of virtual housekeeping. You'll notice that lots of you have now discovered the Q&A box as well as the chat box. Chat box, please use to say hello and tell us where you're from. Q&A box is going to be available throughout. So if you have questions, if you'd like any questions put to any of our speakers throughout, you can use that. You can pop your question in there throughout the webinar. And we've saved a chunk of time towards the end for our speakers to answer those questions. So any questions around this topic, around the different organizations that are being represented here today, please feel free to use that Q&A box and we'll try to get to those questions towards the end. We want this to be as engaging and interactive as possible. So we're hoping that there's going to be some dialogue back and forth and some really great discussion around this topic. Finally, for those of you who are tweeters or avid Twitter users, you'll notice on the screen that we have different handles that we're using. So this is Sentry, HPL Edu, and @gems_Kyle. So those are the handles. And then we're using the hashtag Metacognition in primary. So if this webinar isn't enough for you, we're going to be taking the conversation onto Twitter as well. And continuing there. So please do use that hashtag, tweet about us, and let's see if we can reach an even wider community. So a very warm welcome. I think we've got lots of you here now, and I think we're ready to start. So just very briefly, in terms of introduction, I'm Charles Wood. I lead the international team at Sentry Tech. Sentry, as some of you will know, some of you won't know, is an online teaching and learning tool that combines artificial intelligence with the latest research in learning science and neuroscience. And it does that in order to create constantly adapting personalized pathways for each and every student, whilst empowering teachers with data that they can use to perform interventions. I'm super privileged to be joined by two other leading organizations, High Performance Learning, which is an organization that we're an associate member of, and also GEMS Wellington International Academy, Al Kyle, one of our flagship schools in the Dubai area, who've answered nearly 2 million self-marked questions on our learning platform over the past 18 months. So you're going to hear from all of us today, and you're going to actually hear from two experts from both High Performance Learning and GEMS Wellington. From High Performance Learning, we're very privileged to have Melanie Saunders, who is the Chief Education Advisor for High Performance Learning. I can see lots of the schools that are being named here are already High Performance Learning schools, and some of you will be exploring that at the moment. So Melanie has been a part of High Performance Learning since it was established by Professor Deborah Eyre in 2016. And now she is the Chief Education Advisor for the organization. She contributed extensively to the design of the World-Class Schools Award and has supported many exceptional schools to successful accreditation. Melanie has extensive experience of school leadership as a secondary head teacher, but also as a school governor, IEB chair, and for many years as a head of strategic school improvement for Hampshire and the Isle of Wight. So a very warm welcome to Melanie. If that isn't enough for you, you can catch up with some of Melanie's recent publications such as the Secondary Curriculum Leaders Handbook published by John Katz, which again, many of you will know. As well as having Melanie here, we're super privileged to have Ben Cooper, who is the primary principal of GEMS Wellington International Academy, Al Kyle, both a high performance learning school and a Century Tech school. Ben has a keen interest in neuroscience and the science of learning, and what the implications are that for those areas on implementing the most effective ways to teach and learn, something which hopefully you're all interested in today. Ben believes in designing personalized learning journeys for each child, combining this with research-based teaching strategies so we can guarantee success for all, socially, academically, and personally, something that I wholeheartedly agree with. So without further ado, I am going to shut up and pass you over to the experts, and we're going to hear from Melanie first. So Melanie, a very warm welcome to you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much indeed, Charles, and good morning, good afternoon to everybody. I'm going to begin by sharing my screen, so just bear with me whilst I do that. My tiger. So here we go. We're going to go through some slides, and what I'm going to do in this presentation, which I hope you can all see, is talk a little bit about why meta thinking or metacognition, the terms are almost interchangeable, but I will say a little bit about terminology as we go through this, why it's really important, and how we start thinking about our teaching in respect to growing these sort of thinking skills in our children. And then obviously I'll hand over to Ben, who'll give you some much more practical applications of the sort of more theoretical stuff that I'm talking about. So meta thinking, metacognition is simply thinking about our thinking. So meta is sort of beyond or above. So we're thinking about the way in which we think. So why is this important? Well, increasingly we want students to be partners in their learning, to have some control over it and be able to think about how they approach different activities and think about what is best for this task that they're being asked to complete, and to think about how they apply what they already know to the unexpected so that they're not fazed by new things that they haven't seen before. And when they encounter unfamiliar circumstances or questions they weren't expecting, they're able to draw on what they know, what they understand, and think about how they apply that to what they're doing now. It's also about how to grow effective learners, so they're able to plan what they do, they're able to monitor their own performance and think about whether or not they need help. I just share this a little picture with you because I think it's really sums things up. So the idea of not responding immediately and helping children to understand that when something happens, there's often an emotional response, which might be to do with fear or anger or confusion or whatever else it is. And that concept of just taking a meta moment where we stop and think about it for a minute, we picture what it would look like if we responded in a good way, think about a strategy for doing that and picture how we succeed. So in a nutshell, that's what meta thinking is. It's sort of taking a moment, sometimes more than a moment, to think about the best way of proceeding. I'd say a little bit about terminology. And in high performance learning, we break down meta thinking into these four elements. And the reason I'm just going to spend a moment or two on them is because I think as teachers, this helps make it really clear, because I think these are things that most of us do. So metacognition is about understanding. So understanding how I think, understanding different ways of thinking, and understanding what would be a good way of thinking about this. Strategy planning is, I've got this task to do. Let me, before I start, think about a good way of doing it. Self-regulation, which I'm going to spend a bit of time on because it's my favorite really, is the ability to monitor yourself. Think about how you're responding to this and how you self-correct. And intellectual confidence, that element of meta thinking, which is when you start talking and you're able to explain why you think what you do and justify your views. And it's really important because intellectual confidence is the external manifestation of how you've been thinking, really important. So thinking about thinking. Metacognition. So thinking about the thing, whether that is a multiplication sum or whether it's the impact of plastics in the sea, that is the thing. Metacognition is how I approach my thinking about it. So these sorts of things, I'm thinking about what I know and what I don't know. I'm thinking about the best way of starting this work. I'm picturing how it would look if I did this well. I'm reflecting on what went well and what I'll do next time. And it's being really conscious about that sort of thinking and helping children to understand that that is the way of approaching work. Ploughing at it, doing it, finding you can't do it and thinking, well, that's just because I'm hopeless, is unhelpful. What we need to be thinking about is, okay, nobody can do things unless they think about it. So we're going to stop and explore how we do that. And what's key to this, and this is why Ben's input is really powerful, is that we can teach children how to do it. It's not something you do or don't do. It's something we embed in our teaching. It becomes a sort of habit of mind. So it's really important that children can do things when we are not there to tell them how to do it. And that comes from how we teach, the tasks we design, and what we expect our children to do as part of the learning process. So teachers are not always on transmit and teach, and children on receive. This is about helping children to be active learners, so that when there isn't, as Guy Claxton says, an obliging teacher telling them what to learn and how, they have some idea how to approach things. So usual practice. Think about it before you start. So what am I going to learn and how am I going to learn it? And these sorts of meta starters are things that lots of teachers do, and they trigger that learning process, that metacognition process. So I am going to think before I plow into it. And once I get partway through it, I'm going to stop and think about how it's going, what I need to do next. I'll say a little bit about strategy planning. Strategy planning is probably the most straightforward element of meta thinking, because we all do it and children do it automatically. So if you think about those rings, and if you start with a small one, you finished, it's never going to work. So small children actually are already often automatically strategy planning. Connect 4, Candy Crush, they're all things that require a strategy. But when we get into school, we start to teach children ways of strategy planning, ways of thinking before they start. So we expect before they write a story for them to think a little bit about how they're going to do it. You don't just begin in the middle, you think about it. And we expect them, as they grow older, to be able to apply a strategy they know. So if you're doing addition sums, you have a strategy, you learn it on simple sums, and you apply it on more complex sums. And strategy planning is a very straightforward element of meta thinking, an element of metacognition, and one we use all the time. I'm going to say a little bit, I'm going to play you a short video here, just to illustrate the importance of self-regulation, that ability to monitor, evaluate, and self-correct our behaviour. So the little short video I'm going to show you, and I hope this all plays okay, is an illustration of a very famous experiment, an experiment carried out in 1969 at Stanford University in the US, on a group of 4-year-old children. I'm not sure how legal that would be these days, but moving on. So just watch this little video. And what it is, it's small children, 4-year-olds mainly, being given a marshmallow. And the test is, can they resist? Can they regulate their desire to eat the marshmallow before, or can they hold on until the researcher comes back and gives them a second one? Just hold on for a second. It's not very long. And we'll talk about it, well, I'll talk about it at the end.
Okay, sit in that chair. All right, here's the deal. Marshmallow, for you. You can either wait, and I'll give you another one if you wait, or you can eat it now. When I come back, I'll give you another one, so then you'll have two. But stay in here and stay in the chair till I come back, okay? All right. I'm gonna go do something and then I'll come back.
It smells yummy. Oh, it smells really good.
All right, so it's up to you. You can have it now or you can wait. Okay? I'll be back. Stay in the chair, okay? Okay. All right, so I'm gonna leave and then I'll come back, okay? So you can either eat it right now or you can wait. Either way, okay? Okay. How'd you do? Did you do good? You did?
Yeah.
You wanted to eat it, didn't you? Yeah. So did I tell you to give you another one? Okay, now you can have both. You need them.
The reason that's worth thinking about is because you see those little children employing a range of strategies in order to try not to give in to temptation. And Stanford carried out a longitudinal study over nearly 40 years to look at what happened to the children who resisted and those who didn't. And it won't surprise you that the children who were able to resist were not only more successful in school and in work, they were less likely to be addicted to things like drugs and alcohol, less likely to be involved in crime, etc., etc., etc. The interesting element of it, though, is they repeated the experiment and they looked at whether or not the children could trust the presenter. So were they really going to get the reward or were they not? And what that showed was that children learn how to be self-reflective, how to defer gratification, or they do not. And part of that is about their belief in whether or not their behavior will bring reward. So for some children, the only reward you're going to get is the one that's in your hand now, because people promise things and they don't deliver. And what really matters is that all of that experimentation shows, firstly, that self-regulation is incredibly important. It's the same thing as referred to as grit sometimes in the US. It's really important. It affects how successful you are. The second thing that's really important is that we can teach children self-regulatory activity as an aspect of thinking about how you think. So this whole business about having strategies, monitoring your behavior, self-reflecting on how well you're doing and why. And we do this in a lot of ways in school. These are all self-regulation and reflection tools that we are using in order to help children grow that idea that you can manage your emotions, you can do better. If things didn't go well, it's not because you're a fool, it's because you haven't thought about a strategy for it to go well. And just because this is good, it doesn't mean it can't be better. And we can understand why we were cross, why it didn't go well, why we were frustrated, how we improve, and we can teach it. And it's really important as an element of thinking about thinking that we teach children how to think about why they respond as they do, why they feel like they do, why their work is like it is, and how they can control their own improvement. So the sort of things that you might do in relation to this is things like a knowledge harvest. So it's very frustrating for children if they're an in-class expert on whatever it is and nobody asks them before you start, and then you tell them stuff they already know. Thinking about killer questions, not answers, but killer questions. What do you want to know about this? And then at the end, did we answer your questions? The fact that they have to expect that you're going to ask them to reflect. It's not going to be good enough to say they've done it. I want to know how well you did it and how you could do it again. So types of questioning, the first answer isn't the only one. Let's say it again better. And absolutely key, what did you try before you asked me for help? Do you need help, or can you find your own way out of the pit? And encouraging them to use the language of meta thinking, to talk about metacognitive strategies, to talk about strategy planning, and to describe what they're going to do next and why they're going to do it. I mean, just as sort of the last element of this bit, I just want to say a bit about intellectual confidence. It's really key, the ability to say what you think and why you think it. First of all, helps you to be successful in life, but it also helps you to understand things. Articulating what you think and why you think it helps you to concretely form your thoughts. And this is really interesting. So this whole business of how many words you hear and how you shape conversations. So we have an issue in lots of sort of Western educational administrations, the UK, US, Australia, etc., where poor children do badly at school. And most of the research suggests it's because they don't have the opportunity to talk, not to talk about anything, but to talk about what they think, why they think it, and to expect that they're going to share ideas. They're going to have their ideas challenged without it being an argument. And they're going to grow in the confidence that you don't have to dig your heels in. You can actually listen to what other people have say and change your ideas. And there's lots of evidence that this is partly driven by what teachers expect to happen in the classroom. Not a lot you can do about what happens at home, but there is a lot you can do about what happens in your classroom and what you expect in terms of everybody speaking, everyone having an opportunity, everyone expecting that they will have their ideas challenged, etc., etc., etc. And there's lots of ways that you can think about this, which aren't that don't corner children into having an unpopular view. So things with a moral imperative are very difficult, particularly in international settings. So things which require them to have and express a view, but they aren't morally driven. Very, very helpful in getting children to do research, to think about what they say and to justify it. So there's lots of those. I'm just going to finish up before I hand over to Ben, just by saying a little bit about the words. I just started off when I began talking about metacognition, metathinking, strategy planning, etc., etc., etc. And sometimes for adults, learning new words for things becomes something they would rather avoid doing. For children, particularly primary children, lots of words are new words, and whenever they encounter a new topic in science or a new topic in geography or whatever, they're learning new vocabulary, and new words are less of a challenge. But it's really important that children have the right word to talk about the thing, because having the right words is partly about having the power. Language is power, being able to say it and not have to try and explain what you mean because you haven't got the right vocabulary. We don't talk about doing words, we talk about verbs. And a shared language is a shortcut for talking about our learning and talking about our thinking. So the last thing I'm going to say about this is that there's lots of ways that you embed the words in how you talk to children when they're learning. So we're going to plan our strategy. Who has the intellectual confidence? Tell me why this is a good idea. Let's think about our thinking. It's called metacognition. So we need to self-regulate before we go on. Helping children to have the vocabulary is really important. I'm just going to finish up by saying, you know, this is all usual practice, habits of mind. So just as you have meta starters, you also have meta plenaries. Let's reflect on what we learned. Let's think about what we thought. Let's think about what we're going to do next time so that we connect one bit of learning with the next bit of learning. We don't think of them in silos. And when we encounter something we don't know next time, maybe we can pull some of this from science into what they're asking me in maths, so we connect our learning. So I'm going to hand over to Ben there. So I'll stop my sharing and hand over Ben, who's going to talk far more about how we apply this in your classrooms.
Thank you very much, Melanie. Thanks for the looking into what meta thinking is and drilling down to that. So I'm just going to spend a couple of more minutes talking about 5 practical tips on how to implement meta thinking opportunities into your classroom. Now, the challenge with when it's only 5 is trying to select 5 strategies that are applicable from perhaps an FS1 classroom, reception classroom, all the way up to year 6. And so I think the key thing is that as much as the strategies that I'm going to share with you now, trying to think about how you can adapt these for different age groups, different subjects is really, really important. So I'm just going to get my slides up and go through these, but please look at these and think about how can I adapt these for the context of my school setting, because what works in our academy and what is successful with our students might not necessarily be quite the same as what will work within your institutions. So the first one that I want to talk about, this is a great example of what I'm kind of referring to, is in our academy, what we introduce all our children to learning steps or lesson steps. And basically what that is a mini lesson plan for that session. So what are we going to achieve? And that is directly linked to the learning intention or learning objective for that session. But what we can start to do with those lesson steps is we can start to muddle them up at the beginning of a lesson and ask students to order and plan their learning for that day. So a perfect example here is if we are teaching children about column addition, there will be maybe 4 key parts to a lesson where we're introducing and allowing children to practice and apply column addition as a method, and then column addition problem, using it as problem solving. So I'm just going to pause on this, so maybe you can have a go at this. I'm going to give you 30 seconds. Which order, so these are the 4 key stages of this lesson, which order would you put them in order to learn column addition successfully? So what we can try and do is ask the students to do this as part of a lesson start, or at the beginning of a lesson, to start to plan how they're going to learn and be aware of the key stages to a lesson, as opposed to a teacher planning the lesson and delivering it and it being a done-to process. We're allowing the children to start to think about why that lesson is in a specific order and why we build in knowledge in different ways. And that can be, they may look like this. So once the children ordered it, usually a lesson will start off with the teacher modelling some kind of method. So a teacher will model the column addition method. The children, they may practice that in pairs on whiteboards where they can make more mistakes and they can bounce ideas off each other. They then maybe go off independently to complete calculations to build their fluency of column addition. And then, of course, they go to perhaps some problem solving where they start to deepen that knowledge. So you would hope that students are able to understand that they can order this lesson this way to go from kind of a you do type approach where the teacher does it, a we do, and then an I do type approach. This can then be adapted. Of course, this language might not be suitable for our year 1 children. We can actually break this down even further and ultimately break it down into 4 key verbs. Ultimately, we talk about show, practice, do, and then apply. So students are starting to understand in year 1 by ordering and sequencing the lesson that it's important to see what a good one looks like, what the combination or the calculation method that they're being taught in year 1 looks like, and then understanding it's important to have a go and practice, perhaps in collaboration with others, then to build that fluency, and then to start thinking about deepening the knowledge through problem solving. And then right at the other end of primary school, and certainly into secondary school, we might not even suggest what the learning steps are for the lesson. They may design it themselves. And the idea is, if we keep getting children into the habits of planning their learning, then the power of that will be eventually children will start to make conscious decisions about how they want to learn. And indeed, students may then start talking to teachers and saying, well, first, Mr. Cooper, you've shown me how to do the accommodation method. I'm ready to go. I'm ready to practice. In fact, I'm so confident, I think I'm actually ready to go and start practicing and developing my fluency. Other students may also then be turning around and say, Mr. Cooper, you've shown me, I'm having a practice. I think you need to show me again. And they're making conscious choices about the steps within the lesson, and then moving between them, both moving backwards and coming back to maybe the modelling section, or going back to collaboration in pairs, or moving forward and jumping along those. And so students might be starting to make decisions about the planning and pace in which they're learning. So that's kind of tip number 1. The next kind of tip, and this, I mean, what I'm hoping is that a lot of these is you've seen some of this happening already. It's about doing it more purposely. So in terms of students then moving along their steps, or as they move from activity to activity, try and get students to rate their success and how confident they are and how ready they are to move on. So if I was a teacher teaching this lesson, teaching the column addition method, once I have modelled it a few times, I might then ask the students to give me a thumbs up, a thumbs in the middle, or a thumbs down of how confident they are. Now, the danger of this is I actually don't agree with the fact that, particularly the smiley faces, that someone should be feeling worried, confused, or sad because they don't understand yet. Nor would I particularly want children to be a thumbs down saying, I really don't understand this, and that demonstrates a negative kind of, it suggests a negative connotation with not understanding, which of course doesn't fit in with kind of growth mindset and that personal drive. So perhaps the rating system can be completely not related to emotions or thumbs down or a grading. You can relate it to cars and how they feel about in terms of how fast they're going. So you might have a Ferrari. So if you say you're Ferrari, it means you're ready to go. If you say you're a bus, you might want to carry on doing repairs and need a bit more support. So you can, the way children rate themselves and what you use as a visual to demonstrate that understanding can be entirely up to you. But ultimately, the key aspect is children are reflecting and monitoring their progress throughout a lesson and starting to make conscious decisions about what their next step is. So it's all well and good saying a child is feeling absolutely confident about moving on in terms of column addition and they're ready to build fluency or they're ready to do some problem solving. But if they don't actually move on to that problem solving, they don't actually make a decision to move on to building fluency, then they're not actioning how they feel. We've all been there where students feels really confident, they're whizzing through loads of questions. At some point, we want that child to make a decision where they're ready to move on to the next challenge, the next activity, to further and deepen their understanding. So tip number 2 is all about rating your confidence and then actioning it. The next one comes back to the teacher really, and I've heard this referred to as cognitive apprenticeship, where basically we are modelling that meta thinking as teachers, and that's really important. So there are 4 key tips in terms of modelling, making and responding to mistakes. First of all, in your lesson plans, plan and model, when you're up there in front of your class teaching column addition, model misconceptions, model making mistakes on the board. So if you're doing your column addition, you may forget to do one step of your column addition and see the students pick up on it, and then model how to correct. Okay, so first of all, you're tackling misconceptions with students, but you're also demonstrating the resilience and the next steps in terms of how I correct my mistakes. Okay, and by articulating that to the students and talking about that with the students, 1, you're developing a culture where it's okay to get things wrong. 2, the students will find it absolutely hilarious that Mr. Cooper keeps getting the question wrong. And 3, you're modeling that yes, self-reflection of, yes, I've made a mistake, what can I do to correct it? What do I need to do to ensure that I'm using column addition or writing sentences, whatever it is you're doing in lesson, and doing that accurately and how I can correct myself. The next step, or next kind of idea as part of this, is plan and model improving work. So yes, throwing those misconceptions, but equally have some work on the board, or a piece of a piece of students' work, and model how you go about up-leveling, changing, editing, and improving that piece of work, whether it's through mathematical calculation, a piece of writing, or within science or other areas of the curriculum. That then feeds into their third part of this, is displaying incorrect student work. Now, this is all about culture, and Melanie touched upon this, and it touched upon this with the Marshmallow challenge, is that the children have to develop an understanding or feel confident enough where it's okay in class to make mistakes. That classroom culture is really important. And one way of doing that is selecting a child's piece of work where there are mistakes or incorrect answers, taking a picture of that, putting it on the board, and engaging with all the students with that. Now, to start off with, I would suggest perhaps giving a child a heads up, picking a more confident child who perhaps would not be affected by showing that incorrect piece of work. But slowly over time, if you're building this habit of developing that growth mindset, developing that culture in the classroom where it's okay for students to make mistakes, and we celebrate mistakes and then we do something about it, then showing incorrect work and modeling how we go about improving that is another way of demonstrating to students how we monitor, reflect, and then action develop our understanding and learning. The final aspect, in terms of an actual activity you do, I like to refer to it as fake marking and fake feedback. So instead of giving the children a list of calculations to complete for column addition, what we could do is give them somebody else's. Now, I give away the secret. It's Mr. Cooper's column addition calculations that just by chance are all completely wrong. And we give that to the students who have started to deepen their knowledge of column addition, and they go in and they fake mark. So they use the marking policy, and they use their marking codes, and they write feedback to Mr. Cooper, to the teacher, on where he's going wrong and how he can improve. And again, that gets the students thinking about what mistakes are made, how they can go about improving that, and also how they can communicate that and articulate that in a constructive way to somebody else. That intellectual confidence coming through. And again, the students think it's absolutely hilarious that Mr. Cooper has got all of his column addition questions wrong. Moving on to kind of strategy 4, this builds upon what we've just talked about in terms of fake marking, is metacognitive feedback. So when we're marking and feeding back, and when I say marking and feedback, of course, feedback is more often than not verbal and happens all the time. Obviously, for this example, it's written feedback, but don't feel like we have to change all our written feedback to metacognitive feedback. But ultimately, what we can try and do with students is, rather than telling a student that they've got a calculation wrong or they've made an incorrect answer, we can unpick that by starting to think about the method that they've used and where perhaps that misconception lay. So you can see some examples here in terms of 5 times 8 equals 30. Which multiplication techniques works well for you today and why? So you started to pick out what method they've been using and what was most successful, so perhaps they can use that method to correct their calculation. And likewise, on the left-hand side with our Romeo and Juliet answer, they've got Juliet and Romeo the one way round. You could quite easily tell them that they've done that, but instead, you could ask the question, what could you do differently next lesson to check the accuracy of your work, which allows them to, that self-regulation, that self-reflection, to go back in and think of strategies how they can ensure their work is more accurate in the future. Now, this does come with a bit of a health warning. So obviously the impact of metacognitive feedback is it can be extremely powerful when it's linked with previous levels of feedback. The key thing is that it's exceptionally difficult for students to respond to this. So students do have to have a basic knowledge. If children aren't aware of the techniques they've been using or the steps that they've been using to get to the right or wrong answer, then to reflect on their approach is very, very difficult. Their subject knowledge already has to be half there in order for them to reflect on this. So if a child does not know what multiplication method they've been using and they've just taken a guess, metacognitive feedback is not going to have an impact. It's not going to have the effects that they have because they don't have that background knowledge or that base knowledge of the calculation method to build upon and explain why and what's been working for them. So what I wouldn't say is get all your books home tonight and write a load of 25 metacognitive feedback responses to students. Pick and choose the students that you know have a basic knowledge. They've got kind of 80% there, and to deepen that knowledge further, to start to build in a bit of a deeper understanding, you can start to add this metacognitive feedback. But for students whose subject knowledge and basic knowledge of the method that we're using is not there yet, I would look at a different style of feedback. Which moves me on to the final. Well, first of all, I've got some examples here of students' work from the academy. So you see here on the left-hand side in calculations, in green pen, the teacher has written, did you need to use the column method for this question? Explain your answer. And really what we're trying to get, which is what the impact has had on my child, is that actually sometimes you choose a method based upon how easy and what's going to get you the quickest answer. So rather than using column addition method, we're trying to encourage students to think of a simpler, more effective method in solving this problem. And there's a few more examples on this slide. Okay, which moves me on to the final one. So this is actually something that I witnessed just last week, actually, in terms of a year 6 reflective lesson. It links back to Century, but this applies across any tool or any assessment tool that is out there that schools might be using. So the children access Century and they went onto their dashboard where they can see the results of all the different nuggets and all the different challenges that they've been completing. And the teacher asked the children on a post-it note 2 very simple questions to identify questions that they've got wrong and that they need help with, and questions that they can help others with. So as an example of an assessment perhaps the students have completed where there's been 5 questions, you can see child A says they need help with questions 1, 3 and 5. However, 2 and 4 is actually something they're confident with and they believe they can help others with. What that was doing was allowing children to reflect on the questions that they need support with. What was it that we're finding challenging? And equally to identify the things that they felt more confident with. So the children were being self-reflective. Now, the power of this activity came when child A and child B sat next to each other on the same table and were being asked the same thing. So you can see that child A needs help with 1, 3 and 5. Child B actually felt confident and thought they could help others with 1, 3 and 5. They were then asked to sit down and look through the questions that they need support with and to help each other in improving their understanding and look at where they perhaps went wrong. So the students were then able to collaborate, start to think about what it was that they got wrong and who could help them within the classroom and how. Then the next step was then they got to a table, they were on a table of 4 and they expanded it out again. So there was 3 levels to this. The children could see who they could go to on their table to help them. But equally, the teacher is then moving around and looking at the questions where perhaps more than 2 or 3 children were getting the same answer wrong. So there was an assessment for learning aspect where the teacher was picking out common misconceptions from the students, but equally there's a metacognitive strategy where children were actively thinking about how well they performed on an assessment on Century, and then started to think about who they could go access in the classroom who could perhaps support them with that, as opposed to the teacher. So they were starting to think about how they were going to overcome their barrier and who perhaps could help them. So I hope those are my 5 ideas. And like I said, they're not always going to be applicable to every single year group, but equally, I'm sure there are things here that you could take away, adapt, tweak, change, and apply into your year group and hopefully start to develop a metacognitive journey. The final thing that I just wanted to say is all of these strategies won't be effective the first time you do them, because by default of metacognition and building routines for these students, if we're teaching metacognition, then we need to expect that they're not going to be very good at it to start off with. And so by providing lots of opportunities and making these routines, by making sure that children are regularly having input into the planning of lessons through those organising of the steps, regularly being exposed to metacognitive feedback, regularly being given opportunities to look at their assessments and look at which students can support them. Over time, they will get better. And through that modelling of misconceptions and modelling of how you overcome those misconceptions, you're directly and explicitly teaching children how they can do that too. So don't do this activity and think, oh, it didn't work, doesn't work for my class, I'm not going to do it. Teach them how to approach these strategies and then keep doing that and build them into your routines. And if you're thinking about moving through to September, when we talk about induction and those first few weeks of students settling into the class, set that culture, set those expectations, and start to trial some of these strategies. And by the time they get through to term 2, 2, 3, your children will be accessing these activities and engaging with meta thinking in a far more effective way. So I hope that's been helpful. I'm going to now hand over back to Charles, I believe.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, both Ben and Melanie. I always learn so much when we do these sessions with you. So really, really appreciate it. And so much to take away. And as you can probably see from the comments in the chat, a very lively discussion going on, lots of people commenting on how some of these things have affected and impacted them in their school setting. So great. Please keep the questions coming. We've got a few for our speakers, but if you have questions for either Melanie, Ben, or myself, please pop them in the Q&A box and we'll go through them. But I think maybe a good place to start, following on Ben from your presentation, we've got a couple of questions directly linked. So Danielle Harris has asked, what could you do if students already know the column method? So this is referring back to the blocks and the order in which they come. As a previous speaker mentioned, we might have experts in the class who already know this, so they're coming to that classroom with that intrinsic understanding of the topic. What would you do in that situation?
I think, first of all, it depends on your curriculum, which is why it's obviously a school context, is that, you know, sometimes some schools want them to move on to different year group levels and this type of thing. But I mean, ultimately what we want to do is get children to deepen their knowledge and start. And if they realise that a part of the lesson isn't relevant for them because they're already feeling exceptionally confident, and that's exactly kind of what I kind of hinted to, where you do effectively want a child to put their hand up and say, Mr. Cooper, you're modelling this to me. I already know how to do this. Can I go and start to apply? I might even go straight onto there. And so I think by allowing this, you're not going to ever waste children's time, because if they're confident enough to articulate that they don't need you anymore, they're ready to go and apply, then let them do that. And now, if obviously the child is just completely flying and the column addition is not relevant to them at all, then obviously it's talking back to your maths leader, you know, whoever's in the school, of what is their next step. And equally, they can perhaps start to plan their next steps of what's going to take them to the next level as well. So I think there's two levels to it. There's one in terms of curriculum expectations and what your school would like to see for a child that perhaps might be described as gifted, talented, or very, very capable in that area. They might just be exceptionally good at column method. But equally, allowing children to start to make choices about the pace of their learning and how can they move through that lesson would also support them in continuing to be challenged during those experiences.
Brilliant, thank you. And certainly we know lots of our schools use diagnostic assessments to test students prior to lessons, to understand the sort of base level of knowledge. So certainly lots of strategies there for those expert learners that you have who already have a good knowledge of topics. Another question from Margaret is, and perhaps this could be both of you answering, but starting with Ben, Margaret says, doesn't displaying incorrect work affect student confidence? So presumably in a sort of negative connotation. What are your views on that, Ben? And then maybe Melanie, if you have any comments.
Yeah, I think it's all about classroom culture, and it's how children respond. Now, ultimately, the ultimate goal, as kind of Melanie referred to before in her presentation, is you want students you want to celebrate mistakes. You know, that's learning. If a child never makes a mistake, then the child's probably not learning anything. And so for students to make mistakes and to challenge themselves and to acknowledge when they've made a mistake and go, I've made a mistake, what can I do? And be positive and turn that into a positive experience, then you will build in that positivity and that classroom culture that is celebrating that learning process. But you're absolutely right. The danger was if you go in tomorrow, pick the worst piece of work and slap it on the board and say, here you go, let's all look at this, and you've not perhaps prepared that child and you've not got that culture yet, then yes, that might affect confidence. My suggestion would be you would, to start it off, to drip feed, show Mr. Cooper's work, the wrong work. Yeah, I know I've had a difficult time here doing my column addition method. This is what I've done, and the kids will of course laugh and perhaps they find it funny, and then you can talk about, actually, this is my feelings and it's important, and it means that I can learn from this now, and you can talk about why it's important to make mistakes and why it's important to respond to them. And then slowly over time, you might then pick the confident child in the class and say, now you've made an error, would you mind me putting this on the board, because this is going to really help everybody else. And you can even give them a house point or a reward for doing that. And slowly over time, you develop a culture where actually children will just say, I've made a mistake, can anybody help me? And that's where you want to get to. Melanie, I don't know whether you've got anything else to add.
I think the culture business is really important. So I said at the beginning something about silver bullets, and this is about habits of mind. It's about how we think about our work. And one of the most important things to do with how you grow your brain is the whole idea of deliberate practice. It takes 10,000 hours to be an expert, and nobody ever got good at anything unless they tried things they couldn't already do, made a mess of them, and then improved them. And a fear of mistakes builds a sense that if I make a mistake, it shows that I'm stupid. I daren't make a mistake, otherwise people will see through me. It plays to that whole imposter culture. So the idea that if we are doing things that are really hard, that we haven't done before, then we all make mistakes. And we have to understand how they are. It's about the work, it's not about the kid. Understand how that happened and how we all deal with things that don't go right the first time, because if we only do things we can do straight away, we never do the hard work, we only do the easy work. So that building of culture is really important. Should I go on to the killer question one while I'm...
Please, yeah, I'll just, do you want to read it out so that everyone knows what you're talking about?
Yes, what exactly are killer questions? The structured ones. So killer questions are the things that you do work in order to find out. And often when we set up a new piece of work, so let's talk about the solar system, and we're going to look at how the solar system works. And we tell children what is going to happen, rather than wondering what they are wondering. Because some of these things that we do, particularly in primary, are really exciting for children. They've been wondering, how do we know that the earth goes round the sun? Because I look at the sky and it looks to me as though the sun's coming up and going down. So a killer question is something that you start off at the beginning by asking children what they want to know about this topic and tell them to ask you. So how do we know that the earth goes round the sun? It doesn't look like that to me. And you hold those questions, and then at the end of whatever it is you're studying, you ask them whether their questions have been answered. Sometimes they're also a trigger for things like inquiry-based activity. So those killer questions, they can be structured, but often they're not. What they are is what is in a child's head that they really want to know about this. When you get to the end, do they know it? Because actually it's a key way of getting them to click in to the area that we're studying now.
Brilliant, thank you. And a couple of related questions from Misbah and Beatrice is how does some of this apply to special educational needs children or students of determination? Appreciate maybe you don't have expertise in that area, but have you had examples or?
I will. Sorry, Charles, bleat on that. Well, it's even more important is what I would say, because learning how to think often helps children, particularly children who are on the autism spectrum, to understand that you can actually, to an extent, manage how you think. And there are things with names, ways of thinking with names, and ways of thinking about activities, which doesn't mean that your brain is a fuzz. It means you can actually work your way through problems. Helps children to move forward. And the whole idea of a special educational need is that it doesn't mean that you aren't able to do things. It means that you have particular needs that we need to address. And one of the ways you address this is helping children have a bit more control over how they approach their learning rather than always being subject to input. And the last thing I'll say on this before I hand over to Ben, because he wants to comment, is that understanding how to overcome barriers is really important. And one of the issues with things like teaching and learning support assistants is that sometimes they get between child and challenge. And if children never learn that they actually can approach things that are hard and work out how to get past them, first of all, they have no tools for later. And secondly, it's very sapping in confidence. So the whole idea that we're supplying tools to get past the things you find hard makes it really important for special needs children to know these things as well.
Yeah, I think building off, absolutely, meta thinking is even more important for SEND children, or students of determination, as they're referred to in the UAE. I think the key thing is obviously the strategies that I've touched upon may not be relevant to some of those students, but we all already are probably adding in strategies to support those students that encourage meta thinking, self-regulation. For example, the visual timetable. I probably think that's quite a common feature of most classrooms for students. Why do we have a visual timetable? It's because some students need to prepare themselves that they're going to transition to a different classroom for PE, or they're going to have to get ready for PE. And some students need to understand that actually they need to know what they're doing next in order to focus on what they're doing now. And that's why we do that. And that is supporting self-regulation, even a point where for a student where you have those tiny steps. So instead of having a lesson steps, but start to say, right, when I'm sat at my table, what do I need to do? I put my hands on the table, eye contact with a teacher, and I'm engaged with and listening. And having a visual of that is again supporting self-regulation. So as much as my 5 strategies are 5 ones that I've seen and I've seen being effective in my academy, there are thousands and thousands of strategies that already exist and are already common features of classrooms across the UK and across the world that are developing self-regulation and developing that meta thinking. So yes, I think the key thing is that there will already be strategies out there that will support the students, and it's even more important to focus on those for those students, because that's often the challenges that they have in that learning process, is that meta thinking and that self-regulation.
Wonderful. And I know we're very close to finishing time. We've got a few more questions, but we will try to respond to those via some follow-up materials, and particularly around how this can be implemented in a sort of time-effective way. See, teachers have lots to do, don't they? So, but I maybe finish one question for myself. Can I become a meta thinker myself? Is it too late for me as an adult learner to start deploying some of these strategies, and what would that look like in my life?
I think, Charles, that if you're a highly successful adult, as indeed you must be, then you probably are already a meta thinker. That's what I would say. So oftentimes you're honing those skills rather than learning new ones. And one of the elements of meta thinking is the conscious application of it. So sometimes it's so successful adults often do these things without knowing that they're doing them. So sometimes metacognition in adults is about taking a step back and thinking about, how did I get to here? So it's more reflective than forward going. So how did I get to this point? Was there something else I could have done? And often the "was there something else I could have done" is about what you do next time. So I think you probably are an exceptional meta thinker. But identify.
You made it sound like I set myself up for a bit of. No, it's very kind of you. I was just thinking about when I was a student. I don't think I was a particularly good learner, and if I'd been aware, and how I'd be aware of some of these things, I'm not sure. But if I was aware, I can see how that would really benefit me from understanding what this meant, what this learning process meant, and how to go about it in a more effective way. So both of you, thank you very much for sharing all of these insights. I hope that people have got things that they can take away with them and start applying or trying in their classrooms. You will have seen all the thank yous in the chat box, so I'm sure there's lots of appreciation in the room, and we're just so pleased to be able to put on things like this with the wider education community spanning 44 countries. So Melanie and Ben, thank you both very much for your contribution today. It's been brilliant. We've recorded the session. We will pass this on so you can share it with colleagues. The conversation's happening on Twitter, so please use the handles and hashtags. And from everyone at Sentry, thank you very much. And we hope that you've taken something positive away from this today. Thank you.